Hi, when I meet people in real life and online, they very often ask me why the Boeing 737 MAX is so badly engineered and so dangerous. So here is my reply in this video. But who am I? My broad brush with aviation has mostly been connected with general aviation peripherally in various countries, but most recently with Air France Pilot School in Paris 2007 to 8. I was brand strategy lead for the M&A launch of UAC, the United Aircraft Corporation, out of Moscow in 2007, which includes brands such as MiG and Sukhoi. More recently, I coordinated the brand experience launch from a brand strategy perspective with FMI Air, premium commuter airline in Myanmar. Last year, I led PR crisis management project here in Southeast Asia for one of the major airline constructors. And if you haven't heard anything about it, then hopefully I think we did an okay job. And here is my opinion. So this video is mainly about why the 737 MAX issue has mostly been about a public relations crash for manufacturer Boeing. Two inadmissible, inconceivable and tragic accidents happened. Firstly, on the 29th of October 2018 with Lion Air in Indonesia, and secondly in Ethiopia on the 10th of March 2019, both connected to the Boeing 737 MAX aircraft. The week after the Lion Air Indonesia accident, I myself was a passenger on the 737 MAX aircraft 4 times in both the MAX 8 and MAX 9 on Lion Air around Indonesia. And although I was a bit unsettled by the fact that I was taking the MAX aircraft with Lion Air the week after that airline had crashed it, I found the 737 MAX to be a fantastically smooth, very quiet, roomy aircraft, even in low cost. And the handling, the fantastic engine management, the aircon, everything on board seemed to be really absolutely stellar. I felt quite refreshed after my medium-haul flights. I tried sitting over the wings, I tried sitting at the back to see how that felt, and it was overall pretty relaxing. And I think it was a real upgrade on the 737NG, the previous model, which is a very safe model that's been tested for over 50 years. Now, I think the 737 MAX is an example of stretching the existing aircraft very successfully. And of course, let's not forget that what we have been doing now for many decades is stretching basically reliable 1950s technology in little incremental steps in the airline industry, making it extremely safe and cleaner. But how do we get to the point where Boeing and 737 MAX now mean extreme danger, bad design, and evil corporate America? So although in mass media around the world and with social media starlets, now you have the evangelization of so-called truths arriving from various political and profit-orientated agendas, I am now telling you that there is only one relevant technical fact about the 737 MAX crashes, aside from the public relations crash. So please check it for yourself, but here it is. MCAS software. So one should not confuse, I feel, the MCAS software segment, which is a piece of code that's been patched into the plane. We not confuse that with the overall aeronautical engineering of the 737 MAX. The engineering, the design, the technical specification, and the styling of the plane, which are great. So it's like I have a Ferrari race car, but I'm putting in a very, very dangerous, untested steering control system in software into it without telling any of the race drivers. And then also, it's one that mimics previous models' handling in certain unusual situations. And that system now just suddenly kicks in and sends us off the track and into the wall. And then we do and say nothing about it until it happens again. So MCAS was not new to Boeing, but it was new to the 737. So what happened in this break with Boeing's 50-year plus philosophy of pilot control above all, and how did we get away from that? Well, the MCAS software pitched the plane's nose down in the case of the 737 MAX incidents, so that it was done in a very aggressive way that the pilots could not stop the plane from nosediving into the ground at high speed in time. May God forbid. This software used unreliable data. It could not distinguish valid from invalid data, and it could not readily be switched off, although there are very clear ways to switch it off, and those were not apparent at the time of that emergency. The software itself reacts very violently and very repeatedly. It reactioned over 20 times in actual cases that were recorded, so it's like demented software. It seems to me like a very faulty kind of iPhone app, except that it's now applied to hundreds of people's lives, and then by extension tens and hundreds of thousands of people's lives, including families, workplaces, communities, and manufacturers, God forbid. So why this app, and why not declare it to all the professional pilots? And why hadn't it been tested exhaustively beyond question, just like everything else in aviation has to be? Very straightforward. 737 MAX handles potentially a bit differently from the previous 737NG in certain extreme cases, and unless you put software in there that makes it handle more like the previous model in those very uncommon cases, then you have to retrain all the pilots at the cost of millions of dollars in airlines who are running very tight profit margins, who have problems with bankruptcies, who are trying to survive, and who cannot afford that retraining. So if you want a competitive advantage over Airbus, you can derogate authority from the FAA or the Federal Aviation Authority to Boeing. You can put an MCAS software in there in the way that it was done, and approve yourself for economic advantage, which now has become massive economic loss. So I think it's also very striking that you could see this chain of events as something also directly fueling the prevailing but completely false media-driven public belief that computers fly planes and not pilots. Again, this is a big break from Boeing philosophy of pilot control, which is the central mass media message and has been for decades, and will be more so after commercial aviation really starts to kick in again now after the COVID-19 crisis and before the next crisis. So just my opinion, if you would remove MCAS, and even if you just had an iPad course for flight crews that talks about center of gravity on the MAX aircraft in certain extreme situations, which the iPad course did not talk about, or even it tells you how to switch the MCAS off, then you would never have had the accidents in 2018, 2019, and also the MAX would have still been flying since then. So now I guess a lot more training than was intended in simulators, it seems, is about to come up with that, with a great cost impact, because more than 4,000 MAX aircraft still haven't been delivered. As far as I'm aware, with total orders currently over 7,000, and you can't easily cancel those orders with very long waiting lists contractually, operationally, in terms of the culture that you have in your airline. You cannot just cancel those. Meanwhile, of course, we've had over 1 year now of inability. We've been unable to get the 737 MAX back into the air with bureaucracy, government bureaucracy worldwide, politics, public confusion, and a lot of airline bankruptcies going on in the background, and the added market impact now from the crisis of 19. So what was the Boeing 737 MAX PR or public relations crash? So I think a number of public relations consultants who specialize in aviation could have, and some did, make very clear recommendations about what actions Boeing should take in public relations after the first, and God forbid, the second 737 MAX crash. And we did not see any of these actions being taken. And they have not been taken, which include, but not limited to, for example, regular press conferences and media releases showing humanity, empathy, actions being taken to support victims' families, activities to support local communities affected by the disasters in a more than cosmetic way. What we're doing to ensure that these crashes never happen again. Why did these crashes happen in the first place? What are we doing to fix the MCAS software exactly? Having the MCAS software as open source code, which is a very clear trend going forward. And when will the 737 MAX be flying again? So we did not see any of these. On the contrary, American media became obsessed with one thing: Boeing's share price, which has now plummeted, whilst the manufacturer awarded their executives, who they were firing, hundreds of millions of dollars in severance pay. So it looks like a textbook case in how to destroy your own company and take your country's reputation down with you. So what really happened with media and the 737 MAX? Why is it a public relations crash? And I think when the cat is away, the mice come out to play. This is exactly what we saw here in terms of media treatment of Boeing. So without forgetting a left-right political agenda, creating an imaginary Airbus, Boeing, Europe-US conflict and intrigue in media over this based on total falsification of technical facts and business facts. Notwithstanding that, media everywhere gradually blackened Boeing's name over a period of very long months through hyperbole, hysteria, conjecture, technical confusion for media, political, and advertising reasons, all of which could easily be predicted that would happen until such a time as the 737 and the Boeing company now rhyme with unsafe aircraft, bad design, and evil, callous corporate America, and evil, callous free market capitalism, which is the message that we are intended to receive currently throughout the Western world. This has caused tens of billions of dollars of losses to Boeing, and the American taxpayer has to pay for those tens of billions of dollars of losses. Can that be afforded? Tens of thousands or more job losses have happened at Boeing and suppliers, so destroying communities there in terms of the people who build the plane, and the stopping of the 737 MAX production line with huge losses to airlines, in addition to the losses now being incurred with the 19 economic crisis and other economic factors, for example, the bankruptcy of many airlines going forward 2018 to 2019. So I don't know when the 737 MAX will be flying again, but there seems to be an industry consensus now that passengers can't tell the difference between the 737 MAX and some other kind of aircraft. And I've heard many very expert people saying that passengers won't be able to tell the difference. I would suggest that that consensus is incorrect. Just like, for example, by way of an allegory or parallel, when the UK Prime Minister in the United Kingdom in 2016 launched a Brexit referendum in the UK to leave the EU, and expecting the result to be that British people didn't know what Brexit was, and then that turned out to be completely incorrect. And since then, there's been a huge denial of that within the British political establishment. However, I think that with work and time, the 737 MAX reputation and Boeing reputation can be repaired, and the 737 MAX can actually be a big success for many years going forward, as its basic engineering, high performance, cleanness, and economy are just outright winners in the market. Let's just have a quick look at mixing the 19 viral crisis with commercial aviation at regulatory level and what it means in media. So the PR crash of Boeing looks quite like what's happening now between airlines and governments, mixing of draconian civil economic lockdowns with the hyper-complex commercial aviation safety environment. So just like the 737 MAX PR crash, the current standoff between regulators and airlines who are fighting to survive really puts huge stress on independent airlines, and it's likely to put them out of business. It creates a potentially unsafe environment in terms of operating procedures, and it will generate massive media hysteria, mixing up civil social distancing procedures that we may feel are completely justified, together with intensely technical and delicate aviation safety procedures relating to pilots, flight crews, and maintenance. Returning control, therefore, of commercial aviation away from independent operators and airlines who democratize that travel, and away from serving ordinary people and going back more than ever to being an aviation world that is controlled by government elites. So let's not forget the decades-old mass media portrayal in many countries of commercial aviation as highly dangerous and quite random in any time an incident is reported, and routinely misreported by media, especially low-cost carriers and independent non-state airlines. This is a long-standing smear campaign by state media in Europe in particular, but has no objective basis or root in objectivity. We are referring to TV channels and other media throughout the US, the EU, and beyond, with reporting of aviation incidents systematically to look like planes are really being flown by computers, not pilots. Pilots don't really know what they're doing. The whole world of aviation safety seems mysterious, confusing, self-contradictory, a world of high risk where all kinds of terminology is employed that refers to basically absolutely nothing that really exists. To depict commercial aviation as intrinsically unsafe, to explicitly favor state airlines, flag carriers, and where fantastic safety has been implemented now for many years, 100% on the shoulders of extremely qualified and responsible commercial airline pilots. However, not recognizing their role in any manner, shape, or form, but minimizing their role, thus tending again to reserve air travel as the domain of the wealthy, which it used to be and will do again. As we draw to a conclusion now, I'll just talk about parochialization. So parochialization means splitting things into little duchies or little countries or little states like we used to have in the 19th century. I think that the Boeing 737 PR crash, 737 MAX public relations crash, and the impact of permanent blending of civil procedures and social distancing procedures from the 19 crisis into the complex world of safety culture in commercial aviation, not forgetting the flight shaming craze that has been going on for some time, flight shaming which has no factual basis compared to the massive pollution being created by global car, truck traffic, gridlock, industrial production, electricity consumption, all the other kinds of pollution. All of these factors will result in re-regulating and renationalizing aviation. You can see renationalization of aviation happening now, restricting international travel in terms of cost and capacity. Next steps. So, in conclusion, I think the parochialization is part of a survival stance by nation states, albeit overseen at a supranational level that's implemented on a state-by-state or country-by-country lockdown style, restricting global movement and restricting freedom of peer-to-peer communications in the air, but also on the internet and many other places, all of which are policies that are explicitly and openly on the table in parliaments worldwide at this time, led by former Western democracies. So all of this is underpinned by behavioral cognitive training, which is implemented by media. The media are creating and communicating high-impact moving images to reinforce establishment policy in all of these cases. And who is creating the high-impact moving images? It's advertising hacks and ad sales people reinforcing establishment authority. And the advertising hacks in media now enjoy far more authority than any actual expert or experienced person or specialist in aviation, in medicine, or in climate science, or in any domain that you want. And this is going on against a background of rising xenophobia and domestic societal divisions in populations throughout the world. And therefore, in parting, I think the real question is, why is this being done? And why should we vote for parties who have no policies except to lock everyone down, lock all economic activity down, whilst constantly talking about setting populations free with fictitious rights they're unable to deliver, based on identity politics labels that don't correspond to individuals, their personal aspirations, desires, personalities, and their ability to participate in an economy and in a society. So the only future now, I think, is to avoid another global war. How do we do it? As it's looming at the moment, we need to move to only policies that favor economic freedom to reconstruct a responsible society, where people would be focused on working together to build knowledge, wealth, sustainable infrastructure in order to create a peaceful present and a prosperous future. And the motto is create, collaborate, communicate. Thank you very much.